All right, let's talk about the elements. But first, all right, so that was a band called the Might Be Giants, giving you a bit of an introduction to the elements. Now, they mentioned a few elements, some of which you might be familiar with, but you probably knew, have an idea that there are a lot more, right? So here is another song that's a little bit different.
There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and rhenium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, and iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium, lutetium, vanadium, and lanthanum, and osmium, and astatine, and radium, and golden protactinium, and indium, and gallium, and iodine, and thorium, and thulium, and thallium. There's yttrium, ytterbium, actinium, rubidium, and boron, gadolinium, niobium, iridium, and strontium, and silicon, and silver, and samarium, and bismuth, bromine, lithium, beryllium, and barium. There's holmium and helium and hafnium and erbium and phosphorus and francium and fluorine and terbium and manganese and mercury, molybdenum, magnesium, dysprosium and scandium and cerium and cesium and lead, praseodymium and platinum, plutonium, palladium, promethium, potassium, polonium and tantalum, technetium, titanium, tellurium and cadmium and calcium and chromium and curium. There's sulfur, californium, and fermium, berkelium, and also mendelevium, einsteinium, nobelium, and argon, krypton, neon, radon, xenon, zinc, and rhodium, and chlorine, carbon, cobalt, copper, tungsten, tin, and sodium. These are the only ones of which the news has come to Harvard. And there may be many others, but they haven't been discovered.
All right, so that song was written, well, a number of years ago. And since that song was written, there have been several new elements that have been discovered, but that actually covered the majority of the elements in what we call the periodic table. Now, the question is, well, what is an element? So we've kind of made reference to them before. You've just heard a couple of songs that listed a whole bunch of elements, a lot of which you actually are familiar with, but the question is, what are they? Well, elements are simply the fundamental building blocks of matter. And the easiest comparison is they're basically like the Lego that build the universe, right? So, there are a whole bunch of different shapes and sizes for Lego. You've got ones with one stud or two studs, three, four, five, so on and so on and so on. You've got some other interesting shapes that you can get out of Lego, but even with some very simple Lego, you can build some very complicated structures. You can make some very interesting shapes using only some very simple building blocks. And the same thing applies to the universe. So just like in using Lego, you can build, a dinosaur, a tree, or a car out of them. You can build a dinosaur or a tree or a car out of the basic building blocks of the universe. You can build those things out of elements. And just like in Lego, you can have some relatively simple structures, but you can also have some incredibly complicated and complex structures. The same thing applies to the universe, using elements as those building blocks. So we use these building blocks, or the universe uses these building blocks to make everything around us. It makes all the matter that we see, right? Now, each one of those building blocks, each one of those elements, has its own unique symbol. It has a very simple, either one letter or two letter symbol that will represent it. Now, here are all of those elements in order this time.
These are the elements. The periodic table. These are the elements. These are the elements. In order. These are the elements. So we got hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, fluorine. Now stop snoring. This isn't boring, and this is stuff you shouldn't be ignoring. Neon, Sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. That's under fluorine.
Hey, we're up to 17.
You never had it better for remembering the elements.
These are the elements. These are the elements. These are the elements. These are the elements.
So then we got argon, potassium and calcium, scandium, titanium, vanadium and chromium, manganese, iron, cobalt, nickel, copper, zinc, gallium, germanium, arsenic, selenium and bromine. That's under chlorine and fluorine. Just keep storing the order for your motorboard. Krypton, rubidium and strontium, yttrium, zirconium, niobium, molybdenum, technetium.
It's radioactive.
Whoa, ruthenium, rhodium, palladium, silver, cadmium and indium, tin, antimony, tellurium and iodine.
These are the elements. These are the elements.
That's 53,
These
y'all.
are the elements.
Sitting under bromine.
These are the elements.
So now we got xenon, cesium and barium,
The lanthanides.
lanthanum and cerium, praseodymium, neodymium, promethium, samarium, europium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, holmium, erbium, thulium and terbium,
Going on.
lutetium, hafnium and tantalum, tungsten, rhenium, osmium, iridium, platinum,
Bling,
gold,
bling, bling.
mercury,
HG.
thallium and lead, bismuth, polonium, astatine, radon, francium and radium.
These are the elements. These are the elements.
It's getting hot
These
in
are the
here,
elements. These
radioactive.
are the elements.
So now we got the actinides, actinium and thorium, proactinium, uranium, neptunium, plutonium, americium, curium, berkelium, californium, einsteinium and fermium, mendelevium, nobelium, lawrencium.
That's it for the
Whoa,
actinides.
but we still got a little heavy metal to go. Rutherfordium, dubnium, seborgium, borium and hassium, meitnerium, darmstadtium, rutgentium, and now you all can sing it yourself, cause copernicium gets us to 112.
These are the elements. 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 These are the elements.
And now you can see that song was written in 2011. And since then, we have actually gotten up to element 118. So that song only listed up to 112. There have actually been 6 more that have officially been recognized as elements since then. All right. Now, those elements and symbols haven't always been the same. There were other versions of the elements or other symbols or other names for the elements going back in time to ancient civilizations. And what we found over time is that some of the things that we thought were actually elements were actually composed of even smaller parts. So you think of, like at one point, people reference the earth, wind, or earth, air, fire, and water as the elements. And what we found is that none of those are actually an element. Each one of those are actually composed of other smaller particles. And then over time, other elements have been listed or have been named. And then again, we found that some of them are actually complicated structures that can actually be broken down even further. But what we have now is what's called the periodic table of elements. And that periodic table of elements contains all of what we currently know as the elements that exist in the universe. Now, the symbols for those elements. In that last video that you watched, you notice that as they went through the list of all the elements in order, every one of them had a symbol that appeared. And that symbol is always either a single letter, and that would be the first letter is an uppercase letter, or it is 2 letters. And if there are 2 letters, then it has an uppercase first letter and a lowercase second letter. So some examples we have are C. So the capital letter C is the symbol for carbon. Now, it has to be a capital letter. Right? That is a very specific rule for the name or for the symbol for carbon. It has to be capital letter C. If we were talking about Ca, so that's a different symbol. So it's not just a single letter, it's a capital letter followed by a lowercase letter. That Ca represents calcium. Right? So you can see we've got here some examples. Every one of them starts with C. Every one of them starts with a capital letter, but in 4 out of the 5 of them, there is a second letter that is a lowercase letter that makes that a different symbol from the other ones. So capital C on its own is carbon. Capital C lowercase a is calcium. Capital C lowercase l represents chlorine. Capital C lowercase o represents cobalt. And capital C lowercase u represents copper. There are 5 elements. There are actually more than 5 elements in the periodic table that have, that their names start with a C. So we can't just use the letter C to represent all of them because they're all very different things. They are all very different building blocks. So to make sure that we know which building block we're talking about, we can use the full name, but we can also use one of these symbols that will show us exactly what that element is. All right, now to close this out, we're going to have the element song again, but this time let's let Harry Potter do it.
Yes, no, over there. Yeah, they couldn't be more excited.
Okay, so Tom Lehrer, in my opinion, is the cleverest and funniest man of the 20th century, and he's kind of my hero. And he wrote a song called The Elements, because he was a scientist, and it's the name of every element in the periodic table. And that's my party piece. It's quite long, so do stop me if you just get bored.
Okay.
But I will. This kept me up last night. I was so nervous about doing this.
Well, do I feel bad now?
No.
Okay, so...
There's antimony, arsenic, aluminum, selenium, and hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen, and uranium, and nickel, neodymium, neptunium, germanium, and iron, americium, ruthenium, uranium, europium, zirconium, lutetium, vanadium, and anthium, and osmium, and acetine, and radium, and golden, protactinium, and indium, and gallium, and iodine, and thorium, and thulium, and thallium. There's yttrium, and terbium, actinium, rubidium, and boron, gadolinium, and niobium, iridium, and strontium, and silicon, silver, and barium, bismuth, bromine, lithium, beryllium, and barium. And let's start the next verse. There's holmium, and helium. There's holmium and helium and hafnium and erbium, phosphorus and francine and fluorine and terbium, and manganese and mercury, molybdenum, magnesium, dysprosium and scandium and cerium and cesium. There's lead, praseodymium, platinum, plutonium, palladium, promethium, potassium, polonium, and tantalum, technetium, titanium, tellurium, and cadmium, and calcium, chromium, and curium. There's sulfur, californium, and fermium, berkelium, and also mendelevium, arseninium, nobelium, and argon, radon, neon, and argon. Hold on, quiet. There's sulfur, californium, and fermium, berkelium, and also mendelevium, arseninium, nobelium, and argon, radon, neon, krypton, xenon, zinc, and rhodium, and chlorine, carbon, cobalt, copper, tungsten, tin, and sodium. Now, clap.